where after a fresh bout of COVID-19 infections that have been reported in China, tens of millions of people have now been put under a lockdown yet again, as authorities are trying to arrest the spread of the virus that's been spreading across the country. This has now sparked fear amongst the people of further restrictions being imposed. Despite China's efforts to try and control the COVID-19 pandemic and also the strict adherence to the zero COVID policy, which has forced millions of people to stay at home for several weeks. Now, fresh COVID cases are being reported in various cities, including in the tourist hub of Xi'an and other major cities, including Shanghai and Macau. The officials have imposed strict COVID curbs and a lockdown yet again, while other areas are also being put under temporary closed measures. Now, according to the Japanese bank Nomura, almost about 114 million people have been put under a full or a partial lockdown, posing more pressure on China's economy as it struggles with the losses that it has incurred since the beginning of this pandemic. In Shanghai, a new round of mass testing has been carried out by the health officials in more than half of the city's districts after clusters of new infections were reported from at least 6 karaoke bars, a major tourist destination in the northwestern city of Xi'an. At least about 13 million people are said to have been put under a strict lockdown, with entertainment venues and dine-in restaurants also having been closed after a community outbreak of the highly transmissible Omicron variant, the BA.5.2. Meanwhile, in Beijing, cases of the new Omicron subvariant have been reported, although officials say that the outbreak is still under control. According to the health officials, the capital will tighten its vaccination requirements from the 11th of July onwards, which will make it compulsory for all visitors to be vaccinated if they wish to visit the public places such as museums, sports, libraries or other places such as cinemas. But to give us more details in terms of what's unfolding in China, we are joined in by our correspondent Patrick Falk, who's joining us live from Beijing. Patrick, this is almost a sense of deja vu in terms of how the lockdowns are being imposed, with the infections that are now being reported in China. Brings up to speed with the number of people who have now been put under a strict lockdown to try and control the number of infections.
Well, you mentioned some of the Mizuho estimates earlier on. It's difficult to know how exactly they're gauging that, and the situation is changing. We know that Xi'an is under a lockdown of sorts, but as far as we understand, it isn't a citywide lockdown, and only targeted areas are being put under lockdown at the moment. In Shanghai, it seems to be a similar sort of situation. Officially, there hasn't been any sort of lockdown that's been announced, but we are seeing quite clearly on social media, certainly some households being put under a lockdown, and again those green fences being erected in different parts of the city. It's very difficult to say whether or not Shanghai will go under yet another lockdown after that brutal 2-month-long lockdown period it's just gone under. You can imagine that authorities want to do everything they can to avoid that, not just because of the potential embarrassment, but also because of the potential backlash. But you have to remember also that President Xi only said recently that he would rather endure some temporary economic impacts rather than risk people's health and safety, and has signaled very clearly that China intends to stick with its zero COVID policy. So you can't rule anything out right now.
Now, what is interesting, Patrick, is the fact that, in the rest of the world, people have learned to live with the number of infections that are reported, because perhaps no other country is resorting to these drastic measures that we see China is resorting to as a part of its zero COVID policy. For the people living through these lockdowns, how are they, looking at the government policy of locking down large parts of these societies and neighborhoods as soon as there is a report of one infection being reported there?
Well, look, from what we're hearing, there is a bit of a sense of dismay at the possibility of further lockdowns. And, we are getting mixed messaging from China as well, because on the one hand, we've seen just a week ago, they've eased up on some restrictions entering the country, where the quarantine period's been reduced to 7 days officially. We're also seeing some measures being taken to ease movement around the country as well, where, you know, if there's been a case in a particular place previously, you had to wait 14 days before you could leave. Now that's been cut to seven as well. I mean, you know, efforts are being made to try and ease that situation, but at the same time, you know, the word that I've read, which is interesting, is China is wedded to the COVID-19 policy, and it certainly seems to be the case. In Beijing, as you mentioned as well, they've just mandated vaccines for all people to enter a raft of public spaces. So, you know, it does seem as though China's trying to cling on to this zero COVID policy, but at the same time really struggling to, you know, allow people to move as much as they can. I mean, it just doesn't seem as though it's sustainable at all, as we've said many times before.
Right, absolutely indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick Falk, for joining us and getting us all those updates there from Beijing. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.